When I first inherited my grandfather's house, I thought it would be a quiet place to reset my life. It sat just outside of town, far enough from neighbors that the nights felt like they belonged to me alone. The house itself was old, built in the 1940s with walls thicker than I expected, corners that felt too sharp, and floorboards that creaked under every step. It had the smell of dust baked into its bones, and I told myself that was part of its charm. The first week was uneventful. I spent my evenings unpacking boxes, making coffee in the small kitchen, wandering the rooms, and touching the relics left behind by my family, my grandmother's cookbooks, my grandfather's old tools, albums full of faded photographs where everyone looked younger, stranger, almost like different people. I felt a kind of peace in the stillness, a relief after the chaos of the city and the life I'd left behind. I thought the house was welcoming me. That illusion lasted only until the seventh night. I was lying in bed, drifting towards sleep, when I noticed something unusual. At first, it was just a murmur, a low vibration that I thought might be the wind outside the window or the hum of the pipes in the walls. But as I focused, it grew clearer. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't random. It was the shape of sound formed into rhythm, like words being spoken from a great distance. I held my breath, straining to listen. The noise was coming from the north wall of my bedroom. I pressed my ear against the plaster and felt a chill run through me. It wasn't one voice. It was several, layered and overlapping, too soft to distinguish but too deliberate to dismiss. I pulled back quickly, telling myself it was nothing, that old houses carried sound in strange ways. I turned over in bed and forced myself to sleep, but I couldn't shake the sensation that there had been someone right on the other side of the wall, whispering things I wasn't supposed to hear. The following night, the murmur returned, louder this time, more insistent. It came in waves, like a conversation where the words themselves were buried under layers of static. I stayed up, ears ringing, heart pounding, unable to move. Then, just as I convinced myself I was imagining it, there were 3 dull thuds against the wall. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I froze in bed, my eyes locked on the blank expanse of plaster in the darkness. Each knock sounded like a fist pressed from inside, straining to be heard. I whispered a shaky hello, though I have no idea why. There was no answer, just silence pressing down on the room, heavier than before. Eventually I rolled over, trying to laugh it off, whispering to myself that it was just with settling, nothing more. But I didn't believe it. The next day, I tried to rationalize everything. I searched the attic for loose beams, checked for signs of animals nesting inside the walls, even called a pest inspector who assured me there were no droppings, no chew marks, no nests. Nothing at all. He said the house was cleaner than most he'd seen at that age. But the wall was different. When I pressed my palm against it, it didn't feel like plaster covering empty space. It felt thicker, heavier, almost like there was something packed tight behind it. When I knocked, it gave off a deadened sound, not the hollow echo of an ordinary wall. I pulled out my grandfather's old floor plans, spreading them across the kitchen table under the yellow light. According to the blueprints, the wall should have been completely normal. No hidden closet, no crawl space, no reason for it to sound different at all. Still, when I touched it, I thought I could feel the faintest vibration under my hand, as though the whispers were pressing upward through the layers of plaster and paint. On the 10th night, the sound came again, but this time there was no mistaking it. I had just switched off the lamp and, was adjusting the blanket when the whisper rose from the wall, louder than ever. It wasn't garbled anymore. It carried a word, stretched thin and trembling, sliding through the plaster like a breath against my ear. "Hello." I sat upright, the blood draining from my face. My eyes locked on the wall, unable to look away. Another word followed, quiet and desperate. "Please." I wanted to move, but my body betrayed me. I sat there, shaking, frozen, every muscle tense, listening to that impossible voice. At last I managed to croak out a question, my own voice cracking under the weight of dread. I asked who it was. Silence. The house shifted around me, the floor groaning in the distance, but the voice was gone. I stayed awake until sunrise, unable to close my eyes for more than a moment, listening to every creak inside the house made. In the morning, exhausted but determined, I pulled my furniture away from the north wall and examined the surface. That's when I saw them. Tiny scratches, almost invisible until the light hit them just right. Dozens of shallow lines clustered together in patterns that were not random. They had been etched into the plaster, not from my side, but from the inside. Something had been clawing at the wall. I didn't sleep in that bedroom that night. I dragged a blanket down to the living room and left every light on. Around 3 in the morning, when the house was at its quietest, I heard it again, the whisper, the shifting murmur, the suggestion of something pressing against the wall upstairs. My whole body tensed, waiting for it to happen. It didn't disappoint. As I sat there, staring into the glow of a lamp, the voice rose again. Not just a whisper this time, but a deliberate, careful word, sliding under the door and across the floor as if it had always been waiting. It said my name, slowly, clearly. The mug in my hand slipped to the floor and shattered. I bolted upright, but I didn't go upstairs. I didn't even look toward the stairs. I stayed rooted to the spot, heart slamming in my chest, afraid that if I made the wrong move, the wall upstairs might not hold. By the time dawn broke, I already knew. There was something behind that wall, something that should not exist. And it knew me. The days that followed should have blurred together like any other stretch of routine, but instead they seemed to stretch thin, fragile, and brittle like something pressed too hard against glass. I tried convincing myself that the night I heard the voice was just a trick of exhaustion, the way the mind can misinterpret silence. But what unnerved me most was that the silence itself seemed changed. Before, the quiet of my house felt like a cushion, something that closed me off from the world outside. Now it felt watchful. The air was no longer resting, but holding its breath. Even the hum of the refrigerator sounded tense, as though the house was waiting for something I couldn't name. It was on the second night after the voice that I decided I would test myself. I sat in the living room with every light switched off, my phone recording audio on the coffee table, and I just listened. I told myself I was being rational. If there was a sound, I'd capture it, and if there wasn't, I'd finally be able to rest. For the first hour, there was nothing but the soft groan of the house settling and the occasional car moving outside. I almost started laughing at how ridiculous I felt until I heard it again. A faint sound from the hallway. Not a word this time. More like a dragging, like something moving its weight against the walls of the house, just beyond where the hallway ends in solid plaster. I froze, my skin prickling so sharply it felt like my whole body was a single nerve. The dragging stopped after a few seconds, but in the silence that followed, I could have sworn I heard slow, shallow breathing. I didn't move for 20 minutes. I don't even remember swallowing. When I finally worked up the courage to check the recording, my stomach dropped. The sound was there, not just a dragging, clear, measured breathing. And in the last 10 seconds of the file, after I'd gone still, there was a whisper that hadn't come from me. I replayed it again and again until the words were undeniable. Let me out. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat at my kitchen table with the audio file looping softly through headphones, staring at the wall as though it might open into something else. By morning, my rational mind had tried to take over again. Maybe it was interference, a neighbor's voice bleeding into the recording, a trick of cheap electronics. But that explanation dissolved the next night when I tried sleeping with the lights on. At exactly 3:17 in the morning, I woke to the distinct sensation of someone standing by the bed. My chest locked. My mouth dried out. I couldn't see anything in the light, but the shadow on the wall looked wrong. It wasn't mine. It leaned toward me, neck bent as though listening closely, but nothing was there when I turned. I started noticing small changes around the house. Dust displaced along the hallway wall where there should have been none, as though fingers had brushed against it. A faint line in the paint, running vertically down the plaster where the hallway dead-ended, like someone had traced out the shape of a door. The more I stared at it, the more certain I became. The wall wasn't right. It had always been smooth and solid, but now it looked uneven, as though something was pressing from the other side. I found myself pressing my ear to it in the middle of the day, against every instinct, just to prove to myself there was nothing. Most of the time there wasn't. But once, just once, I swear, I felt the faintest vibration under the plaster. Almost like a knock, too soft to be real. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? You can't explain something like that without sounding insane. But the isolation only made it worse. I started jumping at reflections, at footsteps outside, even at the sound of my own breathing. Nights were the hardest. The whispers grew bolder, like the voice knew I was listening now. It never said much, sometimes fragments, sometimes just laughter, but the most terrifying thing was how intimate it felt. It wasn't talking to the room. It was talking to me, always directly to me. One night, I tried to fight back. I stood in front of the wall with my fists balled, shouting at it, telling it to stop, to leave me alone, that I wasn't afraid. My own voice shook too much for it to sound convincing, but I screamed until my throat burned. The silence that followed was thick, pressing, suffocating. And then, low and calm, came the reply. Yes, you are. I collapsed against the floor, clutching my head, rocking back and forth like a child. It was no longer about whether it was real. Real or not, it was breaking me down. And the more attention I gave it, the stronger it seemed to become. That was the first night I realized the voice wasn't content just to be heard. It wanted more. It wanted space. And it wanted me to believe. I stopped looking at clocks at night. It didn't matter what time it was when I woke anymore. The routine was always the same. My eyes opening suddenly, a sharp cold in the room, and the paralyzing sense that something was awake with me. For a while I thought keeping lights on would help, but all it did was cast deeper shadows along the edges of the room. Sometimes, when I blinked after waking, I swore the shadows shifted, like they weren't a product of the lamp at all, but something that moved on its own. The wall at the end of the hallway became an obsession. I told myself to ignore it, to stay away, but my body betrayed me. I found myself wandering there without realizing, standing barefoot in the hall in the middle of the night with my hand brushing the paint, my ear pressed close. I didn't remember deciding to do it. I'd wake in that position, as though I'd been drawn there while half asleep. The more I tried to resist, the more it pulled at me. I even taped over the plaster with cardboard one evening, but when I woke the next morning, the cardboard was torn down neatly and placed against the opposite wall. Not ripped, not shredded, just taken down and set aside, as though someone had wanted me to know it couldn't be stopped. The voice didn't stay contained anymore. It began to bleed through in other parts of the house. Once, while brushing my teeth, I saw condensation on the bathroom mirror start to streak and run downward like fingers tracing through it. My breath caught in my throat as the streaks formed crude letters. HELLO. My hand shook so badly I dropped the toothbrush into the sink. Another time, in the kitchen, the static hum of the refrigerator warped into a faint, low laugh that didn't belong to me. Every appliance seemed like it was waiting to betray me. Every object in my home a possible vessel for the thing behind the wall. Sleep became impossible. I'd drift off for an hour or two, only to be jarred awake by knocking. At first it was subtle, almost polite, like testing if I'd answer. Then it grew harder, louder. Sometimes it came from the hallway wall, but other times it came from inside the bedroom closet or even beneath the bed. The sound didn't stay in one place. It followed me, and every time I tried to convince myself I imagined it, something else happened to remind me I hadn't. One evening I called my brother, trying to sound casual, asking if he'd ever had strange noises in his own house. He laughed it off, made a few jokes, and I nearly told him the truth. But the thought of putting it into words made my throat seize. It felt dangerous to explain, like describing it aloud would invite it into his life too. So I said nothing. When he asked if I was sleeping all right, I lied. My silence was a wall of its own, and I felt trapped behind it just as much as the voice was behind mine. It was around this time that I started noticing something deeply wrong with my reflection. At first, it was subtle. The eyes in the mirror not quite matching my own, the corners of the mouth tugging a fraction late when I tried to smile. Then it became undeniable. Standing in the hallway one night, I caught sight of myself in the glass of picture frame. My reflection wasn't still. It was breathing heavier than I was, shoulders rising and falling in slow, deliberate rhythm while I stood motionless. I ripped the frame off the wall and smashed it on the floor, but the image lingered for a split second in the shards of broken glass. And it was smiling. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my bed anymore. I took to dozing on the couch in the living room with all the lights on, as though a change of scenery could make it harder for whatever it was to find me. But that didn't matter. Nothing mattered. The voice didn't need a single place anymore. It was everywhere, just waiting. One night, while lying half awake on the couch, I heard it so clearly I felt the words vibrate against the bones of my skull. The tone was calm, almost kind, but it carried a certainty that froze me. You've already opened the door. I sat up so fast my vision blurred. My mouth was dry, my hands shaking as I whispered out loud, "No, I haven't touched anything." But in my chest I knew it was right. The thing behind the wall had never needed hinges or a handle. It only needed me. Every time I listened, every time I pressed my ear to the plaster, every time I acknowledged it, I had been turning something inside myself. And now I wasn't sure if the door it spoke of was in the hallway wall or inside my own mind. I thought about leaving. I even packed a bag once, throwing clothes and my laptop into it while my heart pounded, but as I stood at the front door, I heard something that made me stop cold. From behind the hallway wall, muffled but sharp, came a voice in my own tone. "Don't go." It wasn't mocking. It wasn't even threatening. It sounded desperate, pleading, like me. And I realized that if I left, it might not stay behind. That night, lying back on the couch, I stared at the ceiling for hours, try not to blink, try not to fall asleep. I heard breathing in the room with me, slow, patient, in rhythm with mine, but just slightly off, as though something was practicing being me. I held my breath to prove it wrong. The sound didn't stop. I started keeping every mirror in the house covered. Old sheets, towels, even cardboard taped across the bathroom glass. It didn't matter that I looked ridiculous. I couldn't stand catching sight of myself anymore. Every reflection felt like an ambush, waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to see something I couldn't unsee. But even without the glass, I still felt watched. There's no other way to explain it. When I moved from one room to the next, I felt something shift just behind me, like a presence following my steps with the same deliberate patience as someone shadowing your walk down a street. The wall at the end of the hall was changing. I had lived in this house long enough to know every scuff in the plaster, every uneven coat of paint. But now, when I dared to look at it, I could see faint outlines in the dust, as though the shape of a frame was pushing through. Straight edges, too precise to be natural, and in the center of that space a discolored patch that seemed darker every day, like rot bleeding through the surface. Sometimes, when I passed it quickly, I could have sworn I saw the faintest line at the edge where wall met ceiling, as though the plaster itself had begun to separate. I never touched it again. I was afraid if I did, my hand would sink right through. The sound of breathing was constant now. It followed me through the house, sometimes shallow and fast like excitement, other times slow and heavy, pressing down into my chest until I could barely draw in air. Once, while washing dishes, I felt hot moisture brush against my ear, as though someone had leaned in close behind me. I spun so fast the plate shattered in the sink, but no one was there. The house was empty, and yet I couldn't shake the sensation that whoever had breathed against me had wanted me to know they were there, that they could get that close without effort. Sleep came in fractured pieces, if it came at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt as though something in the room leaned closer to the bed. I started keeping knives under my pillow, ridiculous as that was, but the idea of being unarmed while lying in the dark made my skin crawl. The worst nights were when I dreamed, because the dreams were never mine anymore. I find myself standing in the hallway, staring at the wall where the door should be, but in the dream, it wasn't sealed. It was there, clear as day, a wooden door with a tarnished brass knob. And the voice on the other side wasn't muffled anymore. It spoke clearly, just like a person standing a foot away. "Open it." I never obeyed, not even in sleep, but each time I woke, I felt further pulled toward it. The dreams weren't random. They were rehearsals. My body would wake stiff, as if I'd been standing upright the entire night, and more than once I woke to find myself already in the hallway, hand inches from the wall. I never remembered walking there. I began to fear falling asleep at all, not for nightmares, but for what I might do while trapped in them. One night, I tried to record myself again, hoping maybe I'd find proof that this was happening to me and not just in my mind. I set my phone against the table and let it run overnight while I tried to rest on the couch. Listening to that file the next morning was the closest I've come to losing my sanity entirely. For the first 2 hours, nothing unusual Just the sound of me shifting restlessly, coughing once, the creak of the couch. Then came the sound of footsteps. Not mine. Bare feet on the hardwood floor, moving slowly from the hallway to the living room. I could hear myself breathing, growing faster, ragged, and then I heard my own voice. But it wasn't me. It was calm, deliberate, and far too close to the microphone. It said, almost gently, "Don't fight it. You already let me in." The recording cut off there, corrupted somehow, as if the file itself couldn't hold the rest. I threw the phone across the room and didn't pick it up for hours. But I didn't need the proof anymore. The voice was right. I had let it in. Every second I'd spent listening, every moment I'd stood at that wall, every dream I'd walked toward that invisible door, it had been pushing through me instead of the plaster. The days began bleeding together. I stopped answering calls, stopped leaving the house. My curtain stayed shut against the world outside. Not because I wanted to hide from people, but because I didn't want anyone else to see what was inside. Sometimes I caught myself murmuring under my breath without realizing it, half-formed words I didn't understand. Once I looked down at my hands and saw streaks of dust on my palms, the same color as the plaster from the hallway wall, though I hadn't touched it. I washed them raw, but no amount of scrubbing could shake the feeling that the house was working its way into me, grain by grain. One evening, I gathered enough strength to walk outside, just to stand on the porch, just to feel air that hadn't been circulated through that cursed house. The street was empty, quiet, but when I glanced back at the windows, I saw something that still haunts me. A face in the glass of the living room window. My own face, smiling, wide and fixed, while I stood outside staring in with horror. I stumbled down the steps and nearly collapsed on the lawn, but by the time I forced myself to look again, the window was empty. That night, the voice didn't bother with subtlety. The walls shook with the sound of pounding fists, not from outside, but from within, rattling the frames and fixtures. The voice called my name over and over, in my tone, in my cadence, until I pressed my hands against my ears and screamed. But no matter how loud I screamed, it was louder. The house itself seemed to reverberate with its demand. The line of plaster at the end of the hall had split now, a hairline crack that ran from floor to ceiling, and from the center of it leaked a thin trickle of dust. I couldn't look away. I knew it was almost through, and worst of all, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop it anymore. A part of me, hollowed and exhausted, wondered what would happen if I just let it finish. If I stepped aside and allowed the door to be what it always wanted to be. I don't know how to begin this without sounding like someone who has already lost everything that makes a person believable. Maybe I already have. Maybe that's the point. For weeks I told myself I still had control, that I could fight it, that I could hold on to some sliver of what was mine. But there is no control. Not when something knows you from the inside out. Not when it has been patient enough to wait until you wear yourself down, grain by grain, like dust sifting through cracks in old wood. The wall at the end of the hall is no longer a wall. Not really. I can still see plaster, but it isn't right. The crack runs wider now, wide enough that in certain light I can see into it. Not far, just enough to make out shapes, enough to see a depth that should not exist in a house this small. Behind that crack, there is space. Not a room, not even a closet. Just space, black and shifting, like a mouth waiting to speak. Sometimes, if I stare too long, I see movement. Pale things pressed close to the other side, straining against the narrow opening like worms beneath skin. And sometimes, when the house goes quiet, I can hear them scratching. I no longer sleep in beds or on couches. I collapse wherever I drop, often with my back pressed to the wall, just to feel something solid against me. But even that feels false now, as though the solidity of the house is nothing more than a mask. At night, I hear the sounds of furniture dragging across the floor when nothing has moved. Doors opening and shutting, though every door is locked. My reflection has stopped mimicking me altogether. I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass of the microwave one evening, and it stared long after I had turned my head away, smiling with teeth too wide for my face. The voice isn't muffled anymore. It speaks plainly, as though standing a breath away. Sometimes it calls my name with affection, sometimes it mocks me, but most often it simply asks, "Let me out." The words come in the rhythm of my heartbeat now, like a pulse that doesn't belong to me. I tried recording again, desperate for something that would tether me back to the idea of reality, but every file came back corrupted, static, shrieking bursts of sound that made my ears ring. Except once. In the middle of the static, for less than 3 seconds, I heard my own voice say, clear as glass, "I'm already here." I tried to fight it. God knows I tried. I burned sage, scattered salt, prayed until my throat was raw. I even called a priest, but the moment he stepped into the house, he froze in the hallway, staring at the wall with a look I will never forget. He didn't touch it, didn't ask questions. He simply backed out of the house and told me never to contact him again. His fear was so real, it stripped away the last of my denial. If a man who claimed to deal with evil refused to even speak of what he saw, then what chance did I have? The dreams have stopped being dreams. I don't close my eyes anymore to see the door. I see it everywhere, overlaying the plaster, printed on the inside of my eyelids, hovering just beyond every surface I glance at. And the door is not closed. It is wide open. On the other side is not another room, but a void that crawls and breathes. Sometimes I hear footsteps inside it, pacing with deliberate patience. Sometimes I hear laughter, my own voice echoing back at me with a cruelty I didn't know I was capable of. And sometimes I hear weeping, low, soft and broken. I never know if it is me or something else, but either way it makes my bones ache. Last night was the worst, or maybe it was the first moment of truth. I woke standing in the hallway, hand pressed against the crack in the wall. Only I wasn't asleep. My eyes were open. My body was moving without me. I could feel the wall pulsing beneath my palm, warm and alive, like the skin of some great animal. Dust crumbled down around my fingers as though the wall itself was breathing. And then, from deep within the black beyond the crack, a hand pressed back. Not a hand like ours. The fingers were too long, the joints bent wrong, but the weight of it was real against my skin. My chest seized. My knees gave out. I collapsed onto the floor, and even as I scrambled away, choking on sobs, I knew it had already touched me. Something from inside had laid its hand against mine, and in that single contact, I felt it root into me like infection. Now, even when the house is silent, I hear it inside my head. Not whispering anymore, not pleading, just waiting. Patient, steady, knowing that no matter how long I resist, there will come a moment when I am too tired, too broken, too ready to let go. And when that moment comes, the door won't just be in the hallway. It will be in me. I haven't left the house in days. Food doesn't matter. Sleep doesn't matter. The world outside feels thin, unimportant, like a memory I once had but no longer belongs to me. Sometimes I catch myself smiling without meaning to. Sometimes I hear my own voice speaking from another room while my lips are sealed. The worst was earlier this morning when I saw movement in the corner of my vision and turned, only to see myself standing in the hallway. Not a reflection, not glass. Me, just me, smiling, watching, waiting for me to come closer. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. The wall is splitting wider every hour. I can see shapes pressing against it now, eager and writhing. I can smell something seeping through, rot, mold, and something far worse like earth long packed over bodies. The voice is constant, low and deep, vibrating inside my ribs until I can't tell where I end and it begins. It tells me I don't need to be afraid anymore. That fear is only the first step. That once I let go, I'll understand. If anyone finds this, if anyone reads these words, I beg you, don't come here. Don't look for me. Don't even think too hard about the wall at the end of the hall, about the door that isn't there. Because once you start imagining it, once you start giving it shape, it notices. And once it notices, it will never stop. I can hear it now. The plaster is crumbling. The space behind it is breathing faster, heavier. Dust is filling the air like smoke. I don't know if I'm strong enough to resist anymore. My hand keeps moving toward the crack even as I write this, and my smile won't go away. I know, there is no stopping what's about to happen. The door was never built, but it's opening anyway.